Pack record of the Sethari Evaluation Chamber Sub-Level 3 Kethavar Military Assessment Academy. Filed under Assessment Cycle 1047. Senior Record Keeper. Nos Elder Male Sethari First Formation. Subject Session conducted on the 14th day of the 6th Compact Month. Assessment Year 1-847. Assessor present Sarah Veth, Civilian Specialist, Compact Behavioral Survey Division. Purpose of record to set down, for the permanent archive of the Chamber, and the Compact's Wildlife Covenant Registry, an accurate account of the events of that session, and of the designation conferred therein, so that those who come after may understand not merely what occurred but what it signified. I will begin, as all proper pack records must, with context. I have been present in the Chamber for 41 years. I was brought here as a subadult, during the period when the Academy first contracted with the Compact for a permanent Sethari assessment unit, and I have remained through every formal review cycle since. The others of my formation have changed with time. Sor has led the adults for 9 years. Vel and Keth are the current subadults, grown enough now to serve but still carrying the quick calculations of the young. There were those before them, and before those, stretching back to when I was the one calculating. In 41 years, I have been present for 312 formal assessment sessions. The Academy uses our presence for cadet evaluation. Cadets who demonstrate adequate composure in the Chamber advance to the practical examination series. Those who do not demonstrate adequate composure are reassigned to support tracks. This is the stated function of the unit. It is accurate, as far as it goes. What the Academy's records do not note is what we are actually measuring, which is a different matter, and not one the Academy's assessment officers have ever fully grasped. In 41 years, none of the Academy's assessment officers have grasped it. They think we measure courage. Some of the more reflective ones think we measure a particular kind of calm, the trained suppression of the fear response, the discipline that allows a cadet to stand in our presence without showing the body signals that mark prey. This is closer to accurate, but it still misses the thing we are actually measuring, which cannot be trained, cannot be suppressed, and cannot be performed. I will return to this. The Academy's assessment officers have changed regularly over the years. I do not keep individual records of them. They are the frame through which the sessions pass. Not the substance, but I note their patterns because patterns are useful. Most of them arrive believing themselves to be the Chamber's authority. They sit in the gallery above, behind the reinforced observation glass, and they observe our interactions with cadets and make notes in their evaluation ledgers, and they write reports that assign numerical scores to things that do not have numerical scores. They are, in the Sethari's private terminology, administrators of a process they have never entered. The current Chief Assessment Officer, the one who arranged the session I am recording, is called Drevak Kolm. He has held this position for 11 years. He is, by the standards I have established for assessment officers over 4 decades, unremarkable in most dimensions and notable in one. Most assessment officers carry the sense signature of institutional authority, a particular chemical index that I have come to associate with. Creatures who have secured rank through processes of accumulated credential rather than demonstrated capacity. It is not a bad scent. It is simply a scent. Kolm carries it more strongly than most. He also carries, underneath it, a secondary index that I have noted in a small number of the Academy's administrators across the decades. The particular signature of a creature who is aware that something near it is outside its ability to measure, and who has decided that the correct response to this is not curiosity but containment. He is aware that the Chamber produces outcomes he cannot fully predict. He does not like this. He has spent 11 years trying to systematize it into something he can predict, and the Chamber has not cooperated, and he carries the residue of this in his secondary scent layer the way old wood carries the residue of what once burned near it. The session on the 14th day of the 6th month began as the result of a Compact oversight review. The Compact's Behavioral Survey Division conducts periodic reviews of all contracted assessment units, a process I regard as entirely reasonable, given the importance of accuracy in what we do. The review assigned to Kethavar Academy was conducted by a civilian specialist named Sarah Veth. Her mandate was to observe a single formal session and to file a survey report assessing whether the Academy's use of the Chamber unit met Compact standards for ethical engagement with contracted predator assessment species. I obtained this information through the standard briefing process. The Academy's administrative liaison provides us with session particulars before each review cycle, not because they are required to, but because one of the assessment officers who preceded Colm in the early years had the practical wisdom to establish the custom, and Colm has maintained it as a formality without understanding why it was started. The reason it was started is that we perform better assessments when we understand the context of the session. The reason the early officer understood this, and Colm does not, is that the early officer had the secondary sense signature of genuine curiosity, rather than contempt. I note this not with criticism, but with precision. These are simply different types of creature. The briefing I received before the 14th day's session included an unusual addition. The administrative liaison, a young aide whose name I do not record as she is not the subject of this account, but who has worked in the wing for 3 years and whom I regard with mild positive attention because she has learned to enter the anteroom without changing her breathing, informed me that Senior Assessor Colm had made specific arrangements regarding the civilian reviewer's session. He had requested that the session be conducted using the standard cadet evaluation protocol, that is, that the chamber be set for a formal assessment rather than a passive observation period. This was unusual. Civilian contract reviewers are not cadets. They are not being assessed. A standard cadet evaluation protocol places the Sethari unit in active attention posture, which is a different state than passive observation. The distinction matters. In active attention posture, we are calibrated to read and respond to the creature before us as a potential assessment subject. In passive observation posture, we are background. We move less, we perform less, we are furniture that breathes. Colm had requested the former. When I checked the aide's secondary signature as she delivered this information, I detected the particular index of suppressed discomfort. The signature of a creature delivering a message it does not believe is correct but does not have the standing to refuse. I took note of this and did not comment. The purpose of Colm's arrangement was, in retrospect, transparent. He expected the civilian reviewer to be visibly unsettled by active posture Sethari, and he intended to use this unsettlement, the flushed face, the elevated respiration, the postural compression of a creature experiencing genuine alarm, as evidence that the compact's review process was being conducted by an unqualified individual who could not meet basic competency standards for interaction with a contracted predator unit. He would then have grounds to challenge the review's findings, and by extension the compact's oversight contract, and the quiet campaign of credential building he had been running against the civilian division for 3 years, would advance another step toward his preferred outcome, the removal of external oversight from the Academy's assessment wing, leaving him sole interpretive authority over what the chamber produced. I understood this in the approximate shape of what I have just written before. The session began. I am a predator of 41 years' experience. I read context. The scents in the gallery on the morning of the 14th were not ambiguous. What I did not know, what I could not have known from the briefing documents, the administrative liaison's secondary signature, or Colm's obvious arrangement, was what Sethari carried. She arrived at 8 in the morning, Academy Standard Time. The anteroom door opened, and the aide showed her in, and the aide left, and the inner chamber door was still closed, and I was already at the inner wall listening, which is something I do not always do for standard sessions but had decided to do for this one. I heard her set something down on the anteroom bench, a soft thud, bag or case, medium weight, handled with the easy casualness of a creature accustomed to its own gear. I heard her uncap something, the small precise sound of a thermos being opened, and I detected through the ventilation gap the first reaching thread of her primary scent signature. I stayed very still. In 41 years I have smelled 32 species in that anteroom. Cadets of the dominant Academy species, which is a bipedal mammalian type with a somewhat lateral olfactory structure, meaning they can smell adequately but do not experience scent as a primary information channel the way we do. Exchange cadets from the Compact's affiliated academies, 6 or 7 species over the years, varying in their signatures but broadly similar in what they carry. The grouped sense of institutional context, youth, training, and, in almost every case, the anterior layer of controlled anxiety that we call the access scent, because it is what we smell first, through the wall, before the door opens. The access scent is the most reliable single measurement we take. A cadet who has trained their respiration and postural control can enter the chamber with an apparently calm body. The access scent detected before they know the door is open, before any performance is possible, tells us what is underneath. In 41 years, I have smelled the access scent of something close to 2,000 individual assessment subjects, if one includes the informal walkthroughs and the non-sessions observations. What I smelled through the ventilation gap, from a human female sitting in the anteroom opening a thermos, was not the access scent. It was not the absence of the access scent, which some very well-trained subjects achieve, the flat chemical suppression that reads as deliberate calm, performed adequately. It was not the elevated access scent of a creature in high alarm. It was not the dull, institutional scent profile of an administrative creature who does not register us as significant. What it was, and I will attempt to describe this with the precision the record deserves, was the particular olfactory signature that, in the Sethari's internal classification system, we call the sovereign thread. It is not a common signature. In 41 years I have encountered it in full expression 3 times among non-Sethari species, and in each case the creature carrying it was a predator of significant standing in its own ecological context. The sovereign thread is not aggression. It is not dominance performance. It is not the marked chemical display that some species produce deliberately as a status signal. It is, as nearly as it can translate it into concepts that may be legible outside Sethari cognition, the base layer scent of a creature that has been, for the majority of its life, the most significant threat in the environments it has occupied. Not because it has tried to be, not because it has been trained to be, because it simply is and its body knows it, and has stopped producing the access sense of something that needs to be concerned about what it will encounter, because concern of that variety has been, in its experience, unnecessary. The sovereign thread is what I smelled through the wall. I moved to the inner door and stood there until the administrative process completed and the door opened. Sarah Veth was 38 years old. I would learn from the formal documentation later, though I had already estimated her approximate age from her movement and her scent. She was a medium-height human female, which is to say, in absolute dimensional terms, somewhat shorter than an adult Sethari subadult and considerably shorter than a formed adult. She had carried her bag and thermos into the anteroom and set them on the bench and was sitting with her elbows on her knees, not quite leaning forward, in the posture of a creature at comfortable rest. She was wearing plain clothing, not the Academy's standard assessment observer formal wear, which is a particular shade of institutional gray that I have always found slightly visually aggressive in its deliberateness, but a soft dark garment of practical cut, the kind of thing a creature wears when it expects to sit for a long time in conditions of variable temperature. She had a notebook on the bench beside her, actual paper, bound, old-fashioned, the kind of artifact that some academic creatures carry, because they have found that the physical act of writing serves a cognitive function that their recording devices do not replicate. She looked up when the inner door opened. Not startled, she had heard the door mechanism, and her attention had tracked to it before the door cleared its frame. This is something I note because most assessment visitors, hearing the inner door mechanism, produce a very specific micro-response in their postural signals, a brief tension in the upper shoulder assembly, a small reflexive orientation of the head that is faster than deliberate movement. It is the body recognizing, below conscious processing, that the source of the sound is significant. Sarah Veth's attention moved to the door at the appropriate speed of a creature who had registered the sound as significant and was processing it without urgency, not the microtension, not the reflexive orientation, the calm lateral attention of a creature to whom significant things are routine. She looked at the open door. She looked through it, to where Sor was standing. Sor had come to stand at my left flank when I moved to the inner door, which is a natural formation behavior for her. She mirrors my attention automatically, and she looked at Sor for what I estimate was approximately 3 seconds. Then she looked at me. I will record here what I observed in those 3 seconds, because it is the precise beginning of what this record is about. Most creatures, looking at Sor for the first time, produce a clear and immediate fear cascade. The scent spikes first, a sharp elevation in the arousal indicators that is involuntary and precedes any postural response. Then the postural response follows, the backward lean, the chest compression, the widening of the visual organs that serve the same function as the olfactory alarm flare. Some creatures control the visible signs better than others. None of them control the scent. Sarah Veth's scent, in the 3 seconds she looked at Sor, did not change. It did not flatten, which would indicate suppression. It did not spike, which would indicate alarm. The sovereign thread remained exactly as I had smelled it through the wall, present, steady, and carrying the particular subnote that I had by that point tentatively classified as the marker of a creature that had looked at significant threats for long enough that the information, "This is a significant threat," had ceased to produce a biochemical alarm response and had instead been routed directly into the assessment channel, the same channel a predator uses when it is reading another predator rather than prey. Then she looked at me. And I will be precise. What I registered in the moment she looked at me, "This is not a simple thing to put into the record, and I will do my best," was a specific recognition signal. Not the scent of recognition as prey recognizes predator, the other recognition, the one predators produce when they look at each other across an unfamiliar context and read something in the other's eyes and body that the prey, animals around them, do not read. The specific chemical compound that, in our internal taxonomy, we call the peer index. It is not common between species. It requires both parties to be carrying the sovereign thread. Without it, the peer index does not fire. She had looked at me for perhaps 2 seconds before I realized I had already stepped back from the door to create clearance for her to enter. I had not made a conscious decision to do this. She picked up her bag and her thermos and her notebook and walked into the chamber. The above is this record of what occurred in the anteroom before the session formally began. I record it in this detail because it is the foundation for everything that follows, and because the events of that first minute are the clearest demonstration of the principle I am attempting to document. The Sethari designation of ground scent sovereign, which I will explain fully in the appropriate section of this record, is not given for performance. It is not given for training or for combat record or for institutional credential. It is given for what is present in the sovereign thread before any of those things can be displayed. It was present in Saraveth before she crossed the chamber threshold. Everything that followed was elaboration. The chamber itself is a roughly oval space, approximately 30 meters at its longest dimension, with a high vaulted ceiling that creates particular acoustic resonance properties. We can hear, very clearly, the respiration and movement of every creature in the space, and they can hear ours, which is part of the chamber's function as an assessment environment. The floor is a particular composition of compressed aggregate that carries scent well and transmits vibration cleanly. When Soar walks the full perimeter, which she does during active posture sessions, every creature in the gallery above can feel it. This is deliberate. The gallery observation windows are set at an angle that allows the assessors above to see the full floor space without being part of it. There is a single entrance, the inner door I have described. There are no chairs provided. Assessment subjects stand or sit on the floor. Saraveth looked at the floor and sat down on it, cross-legged, with her bag beside her and her thermos in her hands and her notebook open across one knee. She looked up at the gallery windows. She could not see Colm through the observation glass from the floor angle, but she was aware of the gallery's presence because she glanced at it in the way a creature glances at a space it has been informed about and is confirming the position of. And then she looked around the chamber at us. At that point, there were 4 of us present. Saucer at my left flank, still near the door. Vel and Keth in the secondary positions, approximately 8 meters off the far wall. We were in the active posture arrangement, as Colm had requested, which means we were attending to the assessment subject with our full primary sensorium. In active posture, a Sethari unit carries an appearance that most creatures find difficult to maintain composure in front of. Soar has been described, in the Academy's formal documentation, as demonstrating a threat profile consistent with apex ambush predator taxonomy at approximately twice the mass of the standard adult assessment subject. This is accurate in dimensional terms, though it does not capture the quality of attention that Sar brings to active posture. She has a stillness that is different from patience. It is the stillness of a creature that is not waiting but simply present, without urgency or performance, with the complete attention of something that has never needed to hurry. Saraveth looked at Soar for a moment, and I detected the following: a small elevation in her cardiac rate, which I note because it is honest. She was not physiologically flat. She was a living creature with a normal biological response to the presence of something large and capable of harm. But the sovereign thread remained. The cardiac elevation was the appropriate response of a functioning organism with accurate risk assessment. The sovereign thread is not the absence of biological response. It is the presence of a particular relationship to that response. The relationship of a creature that has absorbed the information that something significant is present, and has moved it into the assessment channel without triggering the fear cascade. She opened her notebook and wrote something. I could not read it from my angle and did not move to read it. Then she looked at Vel. Vel is the younger of the two subadults, and in the taxonomy of the Sethari formation, Vel occupies what I would describe to an outside observer as the role of the formation's most direct tester, where Keth tends toward a measured approach, a preference for patient accumulation of sensory data before committing to a directional assessment. Vel tends toward directness. Vel will move toward a thing to learn it, rather than sitting with the information at distance. This tendency has occasionally produced difficulties with assessment subjects who interpret directional movement from a Sethari subadult as threat, behavior which technically it is not. It is inquiry. But the distinction requires a creature to be very precisely reading Vel's intent rather than Vel's size, which most assessment subjects are not calibrated to do. Vel moved toward Sarah Veth. I watched. She watched Vel approach, and she did not move, and she did not change her posture, and the sovereign thread remained steady. When Vel was close enough that most assessment subjects would have begun producing visible distress signals, approximately 2 body lengths, which places a Sethari subadult at a distance that makes the specific visual detail of the blade tarsi visible to any creature with standard range, visual acuity. Sarah Veth wrote something else in her notebook. Vel stopped, tilted her head. I have observed Vel tilt her head at an assessment subject exactly twice in 9 years. Both previous times, the subject was an experienced handler from outside the academy, visiting for professional development purposes. Both previous times, the tilt indicated that Vel had detected something inconsistent with the expected profile and was recalibrating. It is, in Sethari behavioral notation, the posture of genuine curiosity rather than tactical assessment, the switch from reading for threat level to reading because this is interesting. Vera Veth looked up from her notebook at Vel. She said something. I have the recording from the chamber's standard audio capture, but I will transcribe it here for the pack record, she said, in a quiet, even voice with no particular emphasis. Hello. Vel's secondary scent glands, the ones beneath the jaw, which in active posture assessment carry a particular chemical signal that functions as a sustained focus marker, shifted register, not to the signal of withdrawal, not to the signal of threat escalation, to what I can only describe, in the limited vocabulary available to me for translating internal Sethari states into external documentation, as the signal of acknowledgement. The signal we produce when something we have been attending to has responded in a way that confirms we were correct to attend to it. In 41 years, I have observed Vel's equivalent predecessor subadults produce this signal for a non-Sethari assessment subject once, a veteran handler from the Eastern Affiliate Academy. During a professional exchange session 12 years ago, he had been working with predator assessment units for 30 years, and he carried a version of the sovereign thread, not as clean as what Sarah Veth carried, but present. Vel sat down 2 meters from Sarah Veth and regarded her with the complete attention that the Sethari, in their pack record notation, designate as second-level sustained engagement. I heard, above, in the gallery, the first sound Drevok Kolm made during the session. It was not a spoken word. The gallery's audio separation is adequate for the chamber to function as an assessment space without the assessors above contaminating the subject's experience, and this separation prevents casual speech from carrying down. What I heard was the specific sound of a hard surface being struck once, sharply, by a flat object, a ledger being set down on a desk with more force than was necessary. I filed this as information. Kolm had expected, by this point in the session, to have a distressed assessment subject producing the visible signs of inadequate composure. He had, instead, a civilian reviewer with a notebook sitting on the floor of his assessment chamber, with a Sethari subadult 2 meters away in second-level sustained engagement posture. This was not what he had arranged for. I did not alter my position or my attention. The session was proceeding as the session proceeded. What Kolm wanted the session to be was not part of my record. Keth moved next. Keth's approach to novel subjects is, as I have noted, more measured than Vel's. Keth accumulates distance data for longer before committing to. But the subadults communicate continuously through the chemical channel, and Vel's acknowledgement signal had carried across the 2 meters to Keth, and Keth had been processing it for approximately 4 minutes when she began to move. Keth came from the far wall in a long, gradual arc, taking approximately 3 minutes to cover 8 meters, reading at every interval, checking and rechecking. It is Keth's method, and it is reliable. When Keth arrives somewhere, she is certain of what she has concluded before she gets there. Keth settled approximately 3 meters from Sarah Veth, at a slight angle from Vel's position, which created the arrangement that in formation notation is designated as the first bracket, a 2-point configuration centered on a subject, used when two members of the formation are independently engaged with the same focus point and have not yet coordinated their assessment. It is a temporary arrangement, resolved when the two subadults share enough chemical data to align their readings. Sarah Veth was writing in her notebook throughout this. She had not stopped writing when Vel sat down, and she did not stop when Keth arrived, and she did not stop when the first bracket formed around her, though she looked up twice, once at Keth during Keth's arc approach, briefly, tracking the movement in the way a creature with adequate spatial awareness tracks large movement at the edge of its visual field, and once more when Keth settled and the bracket completed, at which point she looked between Vel and Keth for a moment, with an expression I could not fully read from my angle, but which the chamber's recording captures clearly, and which I have reviewed in the documentation process. It was, as nearly as I can describe it, the expression of a creature that has had a hypothesis confirmed and is noting this with quiet satisfaction rather than surprise. She had hypothesized something about how this would go before she entered the chamber. She had been correct. I found this interesting. I found more precisely that I had been finding this interesting since she walked through the inner door, and I noted that I had stepped back to create clearance without making a conscious decision, and that the interest had been accumulating through the session in the way that meaningful data accumulates, not dramatically but with a specific weight, each piece adding to the prior pieces in a coherent direction. Soar moved at 53 minutes into the session. I note the time because it is unusual. Soar is patient in ways that the subadults, with their different relationship to time, are not yet patient. Soar has been leading the formation for 9 years, and in those 9 years I have observed her posture in hundreds of sessions, and I have a clear sense of the characteristic SAR arc. She attends, accumulates, and when her reading is complete, she moves with the particular efficiency of a creature that has been absolutely certain for several minutes already and is only now choosing to act on that certainty. 53 minutes is not long for Soar. I had expected it to be longer. That she moved at 53 minutes tells me that her reading was uncomplicated, that the data Sarah Veth was producing was clear enough that even Soar's very high threshold for certainty was satisfied within the first hour. Soar walked across the chamber from the door position, a full crossing, the longest possible path, not the arc approach of the subadults, and came to stand still beside Sarah Veth and lowered her head, and pressed the flat of her jaw against Sarah Veth's left shoulder. This is the Sethari shoulder press. I will explain it for the record, because it is not a commonly documented behavior, and because its meaning matters to what follows. The shoulder press is not a display. It is not a submission gesture, though some external observers have mistaken it for one. It is not affection in the sense that the word is commonly used, though it has elements of what affection is. The most accurate description I can produce is this. It is what the Sethari do when they have completed a full first-level assessment of another creature, and the conclusion of that assessment is that the creature belongs in the same conceptual category as themselves, not the same species, not the same role, the same category. The Sethari category for this is the one I will explain fully in the designation section of this record, but for the immediate moment of the session, Soar put her jaw on Sarah Veth's shoulder because she was done assessing, and the assessment was complete. Sarah Veth put her right hand on top of Soar's head. She did not grab. She did not flinch. She placed her hand on the top of Soar's skull, in the particular spot, just behind the supraorbital ridge, where the pressure receptors that serve the Sethari's social bonding system are concentrated, and she rested it there with the easy weight of a creature that had done something like this before. Not necessarily with a Sethari, and not necessarily with any creature this size, but with the casual understanding of a creature that knows where to put a hand, and how much pressure to use, and what it means when a very large predator lowers its head to a comfortable height. I have been keeping this record for 41 years. I have never written the following sentence before. An assessment subject put their hand on Soar's head, and Soar did not move. I am writing it now. Soar did not move. Above in the gallery I heard voices. Multiple voices, more than one speaker, the particular register of humans communicating in low, urgent tones. not the formal tones of assessment documentation, but the tones of creatures who are witnessing something that does not fit their prepared categories and are rapidly exchanging the information that it does not fit. I did not attend to the content. The gallery is not part of the chamber, and what happens in the gallery during a session is not my concern during the session itself. The session continued. Vel moved closer, from 2 meters to approximately half a meter, and stretched out on the chamber floor in the resting posture that, in active session terms, is not actually rest but the posture of maximum sensory contact with the floor surface, which gives the Sethari information, light vibration and thermal transmission, that they do not receive in upright posture. It is the posture of a creature that has decided it wants more complete information about a subject, and has chosen the most efficient method for obtaining it. Keth followed Vel's lead, from 3 meters to just over 1, and adopted a modified version of the same posture, not fully prone, but with the forelimbs extended forward and the body lowered, the head level, the vertical pupils very wide. This is what the chamber's documentation records as attentive proximity, which is a bureaucratic phrase for what it actually is, which is the posture of sub-adults who have independently decided that they want to be closer to this particular subject, and are managing the spatial question with the consideration appropriate to the social chemistry of the situation. Sarah Veth was still writing in her notebook, with Soar's jaw on her shoulder, and her hand on Soar's head, with Vel prone half a meter to her left, and Keth in attentive proximity to her right. I watched this for some time before I moved. I will be honest in this record, as I have tried to be honest throughout. I am not a creature that moves quickly to conclusions. In 41 years, I have earned the slow approach to certainty, and I guard it, because certainty that arrives too quickly is often an artifact of wanting rather than reading. What I had been doing for 53 minutes, while Vel and Keth and then Saar completed their assessments, was reading, adding, the sovereign thread present since the anteroom, the peer index, registered at first eye contact, the cardiac elevation that carried no fear Krastskat undertow, the unchanged scent during Vel's approach, during Keth's arc, the hypothesis-confirmed expression when the bracket formed, the hand on Soar's head that knew exactly what it was doing. I crossed the chamber and sat down approximately 2 meters from Sarah Veth, facing her. She looked up from her notebook. We looked at each other for what I estimate to have been approximately 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, at the chemical transmission rate between two creatures of our respective baseline metabolisms, a very large amount of information passes. I will not attempt to fully translate it. What I can record is the following. The sovereign thread in her primary signature was cleaner than I had initially measured through the ventilation gap, because I was now in direct reception range without the attenuating effects of the wall material, and the cleanness of it at this range was significant. It was not the partial sovereign thread of a creature that carries some of the index, because it has had significant predator experiences, or because it has a particular unusual combination of neurological and endocrine architecture that approximates the full signature without expressing it completely. It was the complete expression of a creature that has been, in every environment it has occupied for the majority of its life, the entity around which every other significant entity in that environment made its spatial calculations. I will explain this because it is the core of what this record is about, and the explanation is owed. The Sethari designation of ground sense sovereign has 3 subcategories in our traditional taxonomy. The first subcategory, the most common instance of the designation, applied perhaps once in a generation, is given to creatures that carry the sovereign thread as a result of occupational context. Creatures who have spent enough time as the apex of their operational environment that their bodies have adapted to the biochemistry of unchallenged territorial dominance. A long-serving pack leader, a veteran predator who has outlived every competitor in its range. The thread in this case is real, and the designation is genuinely given, but the thread carries the faintest second-register marker of something earned through duration. The second subcategory is rarer. It applies to creatures in whom the sovereign thread is congenital rather than earned, present from early maturity, before the operational context that would ordinarily produce it has accumulated. These creatures carry the full expression without the duration marker. They are, in the terminology of our traditional ecology, sovereign by nature rather than by experience. This subcategory is the one given to Sethari alphas before they have led a formation, when the selection is being made. The thread is already there, waiting for the role to confirm it. The third subcategory is what I smelled in Sarah Veth, and it is the reason this record is filed as a designation record rather than simply as a session report. The third subcategory is the ground scent sovereign designation given to a creature that carries the sovereign thread across multiple contextual registers simultaneously. Not the thread of a creature that is apex in one environment or one role, but the thread of a creature that is the same thing in every context it has been placed in. A creature whose apex signature is not domain-specific, but general. These creatures are extraordinarily rare. The Sethari traditional records, which stretch back considerably further than 41 years, document fewer than 30 confirmed instances across all the species the Sethari formation has assessed in formal covenant contexts. In all documented cases, the creature receiving the third subcategory designation was recognized within a single session, because the thread cannot be mistaken once it is cleanly read, and the misreading of it, the classification of it as first or second subcategory, when it is actually third, is a significant error of classification that the formation takes pains to avoid. Sarah Veth's thread read as third subcategory, full expression, no duration marker, no domain marker. The thread of a creature that has been the most significant entity in every room it has ever occupied, not because of rank or size or obvious capacity, but because of the underlying quality that all apex predators share at the chemical level, which is that we know what we are, we have always known, and every other predator in our presence knows it too. I stayed 2 meters from her for what I estimate was another 4 minutes, completing my reading, making absolutely certain. Then I rose and walked a slow arc around her. Not a threatening arc, the arc of final triangulation, and came to rest beside her, 3/4 of a body length to her right, and lowered my head to a position level with hers. She looked at me without moving. I produced, from the infrasonic resonance system in my chest, a single low frequency that has no direct equivalent in the recording vocabulary of the Academy's standard documentation. The formal Sethari term for it is the registration tone. It is the sound a formation elder makes when a designation decision has been reached and is being formally entered into the PAC's chemical acoustic record. It lasts approximately 8 seconds, at a frequency range below the threshold of conscious hearing for most bipedal species, but well within the felt vibration range. Most humans experience it as a sensation in the chest wall and the inner ear, something between warmth and pressure. Sarah Veth placed her other hand, the one that was not on Source's head, flat on the chamber floor beside her, pressing her palm against the aggregate. She was feeling the frequency through the floor. She was, in other words, listening with her body rather than her ears, which is the appropriate response to the registration tone, in which very few non-Sethari creatures have ever done, because most of them do not know that there is anything to listen to. I held the tone for 10 seconds, which is 2 seconds longer than the standard registration duration. The additional 2 seconds are the formal indicator, in Sethari acoustic notation, that the designation being registered is third subcategory. Above me in the gallery there was silence. I believe the silence had been present for some time. I had not been attending to the gallery sounds since Soar's shoulder press, because the session had become the thing I was attending to. But it was present then, and I noted it and I filed it. The session ran for 40 minutes more. I will not record all of it in detail. The record of the full audio-visual capture is archived separately, but I will record the following observations in summary. Vel moved, at some point during the additional 40 minutes, to a position directly beside Sarah Veth on her left, close enough that the contact was continuous, not that the full body press that some subadults use, with established contacts, but the shoulder-to-shoulder proximity of a creature that has decided the subject is worth that level of spatial commitment. Vel remained in this position for the remainder of the session. Keth shifted to a position slightly behind, and to Sarah Veth's right, not directly behind, which is the threat position, but the oblique rear position that in formation notation indicates the protective flank. Keth's blade tarsi were retracted throughout. Her head was at a level consistent with active monitorings of the chamber entrance, which is the direction a protective flank faces. Soar maintained the shoulder press for an extended period, then lifted her head and moved to stand facing the chamber entrance at the position would designate in formal notation as forward guard. I remained beside Sarah Veth for the duration. She wrote in her notebook. She asked me twice quiet questions, not in the expectation that I would answer in her language, but in the way experienced assessment professionals sometimes speak aloud in the chamber as a cognitive processing tool. and in the way also that creatures speak to other creatures they have decided are worth addressing directly, even when the linguistic channel is not shared. The first question was about Vel, and it was something along the lines of, "How old is she?" which I took as an inquiry into approximate developmental stage rather than precise chronological age. The second question was addressed to the chamber generally. She looked around at all of us while she said it, and it was, "How long has it been since you've done this for someone?" I could not answer in her language, but I produced, at very low amplitude, the subharmonic that in Sethari acoustic notation indicates the response to a question that has a long answer. She wrote something in her notebook. At 1 hour and 47 minutes into the session, the inner chamber door opened. The door opened from outside, using the assessment officer's override key, a mechanism that allows the gallery personnel to enter the chamber floor for supervisory purposes during sessions. The override key is an administrative tool. Its purpose is documented as emergency supervisory intervention. In 41 years, I have seen it used 3 times. Once during an early year of the unit's operation by the original chief assessment officer, who used it to end a session in which an exchange cadet had become non-functionally distressed and required removal for welfare reasons. Once, approximately 20 years ago, by an officer whose name I have omitted from the active record, who used it to interrupt a session for undocumented reasons I interpreted at the time as political convenience, and which turned out, in retrospect, to be exactly that. And once, on the 14th day of the 6th compact month, assessment year 147, by Drevok Kolm, he came down the internal stair from the gallery level, the stair that runs along the chamber's eastern wall inside the structural frame, and he opened the inner door and he stepped onto the chamber floor. He was carrying a datapad. He had the datapad in both hands, held slightly in front of him at chest level, in the way a creature holds an object when it has decided the object is its authority in a situation, and wants that authority to be visible. He was wearing his formal assessment officer's insignia, the full array, the rank markers, the academy seal, all of it, which is not what assessment officers typically wear during in-session periods. They wear the standard observation gray. He had changed into formal insignia between the anteroom entry and now, which told me he had made a decision about what this intervention needed to look like. He said, "Dr. Veth, I need to inform you that this session has exceeded its scheduled parameters and the compact review protocol does not authorize extended observation periods. I'm formally closing the session now and requesting that you vacate the chamber floor." His voice was level. I give him credit for that. His voice was level and his posture was constructed, the deliberate squaring of the shoulders, the slight forward lean that in bipedal administrative species typically accompanies the deployment of institutional authority. His scent, however, was not level, because scent is not a performance channel in the same way that voice and posture are, and his scent was carrying the very high arousal index of a creature that is deeply unsettled and is using the performance of authority as a management strategy for the unsettlement. Sor turned to face him from the forward guard position. She did not move toward him. She turned and faced him, and she was standing between Kolm and the rest of the formation. And she brought herself to what I will describe, for the clarity of the record, as her full upright assessment posture, head up, shoulders at their full extension, the particular alignment of the body that makes a formed adult Sethari appear, to most external observers, quite a bit larger than their resting dimensions suggest. This is not a threat display in the traditional predator-prey taxonomy. It is a display only in the sense that it makes the information of what SAR is very clearly available to anyone present in the chamber. Kolm stopped moving forward. He addressed Sor directly. He said, "Stand down," in the command register he uses for formation management instructions. The register that works adequately during standard cadet assessment sessions is when the formation is in working mode and responding to session management commands. The command register carries, in the formation's conditioned response framework, a particular set of associations built up over years of cooperative session work. Sor did not stand down. This was not defiance of the conditioned response framework, which I want to be precise about for the record. Sor is not a creature that defies frameworks out of resistance. Sor is a creature that reads contexts with extraordinary precision, and the context she was reading in the moment Kolm stepped through the inner door was the context of the chamber as it now stood. A chamber that had, over the past 1 hour and 47 minutes, reclassified itself around a new anchor point. The conditioned response framework for formation management is calibrated for standard sessions. This was not a standard session. The framework's conditions were not met. Vel and Keth did not move from their positions beside Sarah Veth. I remained where I was beside her. Colm looked at the formation as it stood, sore between him and us, the subadults bracketing Sarah Veth, me at her side. And I watched his face do something that I have only seen faces do in the chamber a handful of times in 41 years. It is the face event that occurs when a creature's constructed model of a situation encounters a reality that the model cannot accommodate, and the creature must, in real time, revise the model without any preparation. It is not a pleasant event to observe. I do not record it with satisfaction. The record asks for accuracy, not for satisfaction, but I record it because it is relevant to understanding what the session had become and what the formation's response to his presence was communicating. What it was communicating, in full translation from Sethari formal pack behavior notation. The chamber has been reorganized around a new anchor. The anchor is present. The anchor has not been removed. An external actor has entered the chamber through the override mechanism for administrative purposes. The formation's assessment of the external actor's intentions relative to the anchor is hostile to the anchor's presence. Or formation's response to hostile intentions toward the anchor is the one described in the primary formation doctrine. He stood there for some time. I estimate approximately 90 seconds, though it may have been longer. Sor did not move. Sarah Veth did not speak during this period. I looked at her briefly, and she was looking at Colm with an expression that I had seen on her face twice during the session. The expression of a creature that has had a hypothesis confirmed. She wrote something in her notebook. Colm said to Sarah Veth past Sar, "The session is formally closed. I am filing a protocol objection regarding the unauthorized extended duration." Sarah Veth said, "I'll note your objection in my report," he said. "The report is subject to Academy review before submission to the compact," she said. "That's not how the review protocol works." He said nothing. I produced at medium amplitude, the registration tone again. Not the full 10 seconds of the initial designation, but the shorter 3-second acknowledgement form that in Sethari acoustic notation functions as a confirmation that a prior record entry is being maintained. Most creatures do not know what the registration tone means. Secondary scent layer, at the moment I produced it, indicated that he understood it was significant, and that he did not know how to respond to it, and that both of these things were compounding the arousal index that his voice and posture were doing their best to manage. He left the chamber through the inner door. Sor remained in the forward guard position until the chamber's ambient acoustic register indicated that the external stair access had been secured. A full 4 minutes, which is longer than strictly required by the situation's tactical parameters, but which is consistent with Sar's characteristic patience, and with the particular quality of attention she had been giving to the chamber's entrance since the session began. Then she came back to the formation and lowered herself to the floor beside Sarah Veth on her right side, and lay there with her head on the aggregate, and Sarah Veth put her hand on Sor's neck. The session formally concluded 40 minutes later. At Sarah Veth's own termination, she closed her notebook, recapped her thermos, stood up slowly with the consideration of someone who has been sitting on a hard floor for a long time, and picked up her bag. She stood for a moment in the middle of the formation, us arranged around her in the loose configuration that we had arrived at over the course of the session, and she looked around at each of us, and she said something that I will transcribe here because it deserves to be in the record. "Thank you. This was the most useful thing I've done in a long time." Then she walked to the inner door and through it, and the door closed. Vel pressed forward immediately and put her nose against the door seam and breathed deeply, which is the subadult formation behavior for tracking the departure of a contact the formation has designated significant. Keth went to the door position as well. This is not anomalous behavior. It is what the formation does when a designated contact leaves the immediate space. The chemical trace of the contact is preserved in the formation's shared sensory record for comparison in future encounters. I stood in the middle of the chamber for a period I did not measure. Then I went to the wall alcove where the pack record tablets are stored, and I took one out and I began writing. The designation of ground scent sovereign, third subcategory, is not conferred lightly. I am aware that this record will be reviewed by the Compact's Behavioral Survey Division as part of Sarah Veth's formal survey filing, by the Academy's administrative review process, possibly by the Compact's Wildlife Covenant Registry. If the designation triggers the standard covenant review protocol, which it should. I am also aware that the circumstances of the session, the arrangement Colm made, his use of the override key, the formation's response to his presence, will attract administrative attention that is separate from the designation question, and that the two matters will become entangled in the institutional processes that follow. I will address the designation first, and the administrative matter second, because that is the order in which they are important. The designation. What I have described in this record is a session in which a human female civilian assessment consultant, carrying no handler certification, no formal credentials in predator unit interaction, and no institutional rank within the Academy's authority structure, entered the Sethari Evaluation Chamber and was recognized by all 4 members of the active formation as carrying the sovereign thread at the full 3rd sub-category expression. The Sethari do not confer this designation based on what a creature has done. We confer it based on what a creature is. The distinction matters more than the Academy's existing assessment framework is currently equipped to accommodate, which is a limitation of the existing framework and not a limitation of the designation. Sarah Veth is not ground-sent sovereign because she sat calmly in a difficult room. Calmly sitting is a behavior, and behaviors can be trained. She is ground-sent sovereign because the chemical signature she carries, below all behavior, below training, below credential and rank and institutional context, is the full 3rd sub-category expression of a creature that has always been, in every space it has occupied, the entity around which everything else makes its calculations. We know this because we can smell it. This is not a metaphor. The practical meaning of the designation for the record and for the Compact's formal documentation. Under the Compact's Wildlife Covenant Protocol, Article 19, Subsection 4, a formal ground-sent sovereign designation entered into a contracted assessment unit's pack record creates a standing recognition covenant between the designated individual and the formation. The covenant's provisions include, among others, the designated individual's right to unrestricted access to the formation's assessment space at their discretion, the formation's commitment to extend to the designated individual the same protection posture afforded to formation members during situations of external threat, and the designated individual's formal standing in any compact review process involving the formation, equivalent to the standing of a certified formation liaison, regardless of the individual's institutional affiliation. The covenant provisions mean, in practical summary, the formation will recognize Sarah Veth as a contact of the highest classification each time she enters the chamber. The formation will, as it did when Colm entered through the override mechanism, interpose itself between her and any party it assesses as presenting hostile intentions toward her presence. This will continue for the duration of the formation's active covenant period, which is the lifetime of the elder record keepers signing this document. The administrative matter. I will be brief, because the administrative record is not my primary concern, and I am noting it here only because it is entangled with the designation event, and the record should be complete. Dravak Colm entered the chamber floor during an active session using the administrative override mechanism. His stated purpose was session termination for protocol reasons. The session was not in violation of any protocol that I have reviewed in the relevant documentation. His actual purpose, as I have recorded based on my readings of his scent signature over the period of the session, was to remove an assessment reviewer whose findings would not support his institutional agenda. The formation assessed his intentions as hostile to the anchor and responded accordingly. This is not a disciplinary matter for the formation. This is the formation functioning as designed, and as documented in the formation's active covenant charter, which Colm has access to, and which specifies clearly that the formation's protective posture toward designated contacts is not subject to administrative override. Sarah Veth's survey report will be filed with the Compact. I understand, from the Covenant's standard communication protocol, that she received the full record of the session through the Chamber's standard audio-visual capture before her departure. She will file what she observed. I am informed through the Academy's administrative notification system that the Compact has requested a formal review of the override mechanism's use, and that this review is currently being conducted by a panel with no Academy affiliation. I am informed additionally that Colm's formal objection to the session's duration has been reviewed and found to have no basis in the applicable protocol documentation. I record these administrative outcomes without comment, because they are not what this record is about. They are what the session produced for the institution. What the session produced for the formation is what I have spent this record trying to put into words, with the understanding that some of what occurred in that chamber on the 14th day will not fully survive the translation into written documentation because it happened at the level of the chemical and the acoustic and the specific weight of a hand placed in exactly the right place on the top of Soar's head by a creature that knew where that place was. I close the record with the formal designation entry. On the 14th day of the 6th compact month, assessment year 1/8/1947, the Sethari formation of Kethavar Military Assessment Academy, under my authority as Elder Record Keeper, formally designates the following individual as Ground Sense Sovereign, 3rd subcategory, in the formation's permanent pack record, Sarah Veth. Human female, civilian assessment consultant, Compact Behavioral Survey Division, age 38 standard years. The designation was reached by full formation consensus, completed at the registration tone. It stands without qualification and without term limit, and it will be entered into the Compact's Wildlife Covenant Registry under Article 19 at the time of this record's submission. The chamber is different now than it was on the 13th day of the 6th month. There is a contact in the formation record whose thread signature will be in our chemical memory until the formation's composition changes, sufficiently that the memory requires re-registration. When she comes back to the chamber, and she will come back, the 3rd subcategory designations always return to the spaces where they were named because the spaces remember them, and the formations makes its position on this known. The inner door will open before she reaches it, and Vel will be the first to reach her, and Keth will take the protective flank position, and Sorv will press her shoulder, and I will sit beside her. This is what it means to be Ground Sense Sovereign in a Sethari pack record. The 41st year of the Chamber's operation is almost at its close. In 41 years, the Chamber has assessed thousands of cadets and produced hundreds of session records and contributed to the institutional functioning of the Academy in ways I regard as, on balance, useful. In 41 years, the Chamber has produced 4 formal designation records. 3 of them are for Sethari, Nos Elder Male, Sethari First Formation Kethavar Military Assessment Academy Assessment Year 1047, 6th month, 14th day,